The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
We've got like a huge packed show for you today, but I did want to briefly talk about something here up front, and we'll take an early first break, and then I just have a ton of stuff planned for the Friday show today. I want to follow up about the ranked choice voting conversation. To reset the question, I've been talking about ranked choice for a while, and one of the ways that I think we can get third parties more involved and to be more viable in the United States would be by some kind of ranked choice voting, where by virtue of voting for the third party candidate, you don't potentially end up inadvertently helping the candidate that you really don't want to see win the race, right? Where by voting for example, the Green Party, you might actually be helping the Republican win, even though your second choice would be the Democrat. That's like the classic example. And when we talked, I guess it was a week or two ago, about normal ranked choice or instant runoff voting, where you basically just rank the candidates in the order of your preference. You say, here's my number one choice. If they don't win, I want the number two, etc. There are two sort of main complaints with that style of ranked choice voting. One, and I don't think this is really a big issue, is that your vote gets moved around from one candidate to another, and there are people who say it violates one person, one vote. I actually don't think that's a strong argument against normal ranked choice instant runoff voting, because effectively each person only gets one vote per round, right? Yes, it gets shifted around from one candidate to another, but ultimately your vote counts once in the final tally. For me, the bigger issue with standard instant runoff ranked choice voting is that the winner can end up being the candidate that doesn't have anybody's first choice vote. In other words, the winner might be people's top second, third, and fourth choice, no one's top first choice, and someone nobody actually wanted to be the person as their first choice ends up winning the race. There's a very interesting alternative called a single transferable vote. And I know I'm going to get emails from people saying, David, what you're describing as one is actually the other, and so on and so forth. A lot of these concepts have multiple names when you research them. So this is what, for today's discussion, I'm calling single transferable vote. In this system, the candidates who aren't viable, who have the fewest first place votes, get removed first. And instead of the vote moving sort of down the ballot from top, second, third, fourth, it moves up. So the first thing would be, which candidate has the fewest first place votes? That person is eliminated. So you immediately get rid of the possibility that the eventual winner is the person with zero or the fewest first place votes. Then you do the next tally, and the next least viable candidate is eliminated. So you get rid of the person who now has, of the remaining of the second round, the fewest first place votes. This would resolve the issue of eventually getting to someone who has the fewest first place votes, because you can no longer win with the fewest first place votes, but the most third, fourth, and fifth place votes. It's sort of difficult to explain. I don't even know that I've done a good job of it, but it's a very interesting idea that I've been reading more and more about, and I want to hear your thoughts about it. Could this solve the problem that exists in the sort of traditional instant runoff ranked choice voting of potentially crowning is literally the wrong term since we're not talking about a king, but inaugurating a candidate who had the fewest first place votes of all the candidates? I'm on Twitter at @DPakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Sorry for the short first segment, but we just have so much else to get to today. I want to get the first break out of the way, and then we're going to dive into a lot more stuff. Glad you're with us today.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Hershad Sheth. Harshad, thank you so much for being a David Pakman Show member. You can join Harshad at www.joinpakman.com. One person who did so years ago is Glenn Alderman. Glenn has been a member since 2013, going on 5.5, closing in on 6 years of David Pakman Show membership. Join both Harshad and Glenn at www.joinpakman.com. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Both great ways to support the independent media you like, assuming you like this show. Some of you are hate listening and hate watching. I guess I'm not talking to you, but if you like the show, consider supporting it. Let's go to the phones at 617-830-4750, see what's on people's minds today. We will start with our caller from the 647 area code. Caller from 647, tell us who you are and go right ahead.
Hey, David, my name's John. I'm just here looking at your video on why I'm not a socialist. So I'll start by saying I don't agree with you. I don't agree with socialism. I don't agree with democratic socialism or social democracy, the systems that you like to push onto your show.
So hold on a second, John. If I may, John, I just want to make sure I understand you so that when you get to your question, we're on the same page. So that was a video where I explained why I support social democracy, but I'm not a socialist or some of the other things you mentioned. You said you just don't agree with any of those things, but and you said that I push those things, but I don't push all those things. The video was about why I'm not a socialist, right? I want to make sure you understood the video.
No, I understood the video. You're trying to make a distinction between Venezuelan socialism, North Korean socialism, USSR socialism as being authoritarian, whereas you prefer or like the systems such as Sweden. You do mention Sweden in particular in the video, where it's by you switch between the labels of social democracy and what's the one that Bernie Sanders uses? What's the other one that Ocasio-Cortez uses? Like not
socialism.
Social democracy, but no, the other one.
Democratic socialism.
Democratic socialism.
Yeah, that's socialism. But so, John, I just want to make sure I don't switch between calling something social democracy or democratic socialism. I'm pointing out that one of them is socialism and one of them is not. Like Sweden is not a socialist country. Do we agree on that?
In what sense?
That Sweden doesn't have a socialist system whereby all means of production are publicly owned. Like Sweden's a capitalist country, and they have a strong social welfare and safety net, right? So it's just not a socialist country. Do you agree with that?
In the strictest sense of the word socialism, yes, it is not a socialist country. Yeah.
Okay, good. All right, go ahead.
So basically, my beef with that is, I don't know if you've ever studied economics extensively, you'll know that it's a stagnating system compared to a pure capitalist system versus one where people's property and income is expropriated by the state and redistributed into things like social programs, to elaborate, social engineering schemes and other things of the sort, whatever the whims of the leader or party in question is.
So what would be an example of that? Like, can you give me an example of a place that's seizing people's property to conduct social engineering? Like, what would be an example of that?
I didn't say seizing property. I said expropriating their property in the forms of taxations.
Oh, okay. Well, give me what's an example of the social engineering that's being done?
Well, one thing I was actually looking up recently was, so you know how Bernie Sanders on the campaign trail kept citing Sweden and the democratic socialist countries in Scandinavia. He kept citing Sweden, and I was looking up in some of these things that Sweden's been doing. And what was it? A couple of years ago, Sweden's finance minister Anders Borg came out and he cited how in the 1980s, I think you're familiar with this, you might have talked about it before, they imposed a sort of a Wall Street speculation tax, which is what Bernie was proposing here in Sweden, and they kicked that off in the 1980s in order to fund some things that the party wanted to get done, and there was this sort of an air of, why are these people making more money, and why are we not making more money? It's
we being who?
Where why do they have to have more than we have? And so they tax the what's it called, financial transactions in their finance.
John, are you saying that a government using taxes to pay for things is social engineering, or are you saying that a government using taxes to pay for things is socialism? Because it's neither, but I'm curious which one you're claiming it is.
Well, personally, I'd err on the side of libertarianism, but I see some uses for the state, although...
No, but John, what I'm asking you is the following. I asked you for an example of social engineering. You said Sweden in the 80s had a tax and the money raised was used to pay for stuff. Is that what you're saying is an example of social engineering?
It is, yeah. What else would it be?
Okay. All right, John, thank you for the call. I appreciate it. I don't know what you're talking about, but I do appreciate you taking the time to call in. Okay, let's, I just don't know. Was I misunderstanding there? I don't know how, taxing and that's how that's just called government. That's not social engineering.
I'm sure he's in favor of at least a few social services. I know he said he's a libertarian, but...
Does he want roads? Is that social engineering?
Roads and fire department and police department.
You're psychologically encouraging people to travel if you put in roads. That's social engineering, I guess. I don't know. Okay, let's go to the 561 area code. Caller from 561, go ahead.
Hello, David. My name is Bruno, and I'm sure you know that Jordan Peterson was on the Joe Rogan podcast about a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? He made an interesting point, I think, about how economic hierarchies work, and inevitably, he claimed that inevitably there's going to be those at the bottom, right? And part of what fuels the left is their empathy for those at the bottom. But he also claimed that there's a certain subset of people who just have envy for the rich. Where do you think that line is, and do you think there's any truth to that?
You're saying that there's a line between having empathy for the poor and having envy for the rich. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and then, but what's the question? Where is the line? I don't know. How would you define that?
Do you think there's any truth to that? Do you see any people on the left using that as their reason, not empathy?
I'm sure you can find people on all sides of the political spectrum that envy the rich. I think given the sort of celebrity culture and, glorification of being rich, there's all sorts of people that envy the rich, but I'm not sure that it necessarily relates to whether somebody has a preference for a particular policy that could be based on empathy in either case. Like, I guess I just don't see how it's like somebody could envy the rich, but regardless, even if they sort of like stopped envying the rich, they would still empathize with the poor, right?
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make that.
You wanted to make sure? Okay, all right. I don't know that I've answered the question, but all right. But it's a weird day. It must be a full moon out or something today. 617-830-4750. Let's go to our next caller from the 817 area code. Caller from 817, go ahead.
Hello. Well, I just really wanted to ask, have you heard of the G20 arrests that took place on Inauguration Day?
It's been a while. I remember a lot of arrests on that day. Refresh my memory.
If you'd let me. Sure. Well, apparently what happened was, on Inauguration Day, protesters were kind of restricted from going into zone to zone. Mm-hmm. Well, they even had their own route, a protest zone. Well, and they did their own rally. So on that rally, the police account is that they were followed very closely, and they were observed. They were observed breaking some windows here and there. And they waited. What they did is they swept them up in a dragnet, 200 people, whoever just happened to be in this arbitrary location and time, including some journalists, which proves that they were just dragnet, whoever happened to be there. And these people are still facing charges of conspiracy and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And the basis for these prosecutions is not that they are that they committed a crime. It's that they were with somebody else who happened to share a political view. And so since day one of the Trump administration, they have been pushing to criminalize dissent.
So hold on a second. Let me see if I can just get a question here, just so I can understand what you're saying.
Oh, please. Okay.
You're saying that these people are litigation is still pending against these people, but not for any crime, but because of their political beliefs. Like there's on paper somewhere it says they're being prosecuted because of their political beliefs.
They are attempting to set new legal precedents. Yes,
and someone has been charged because they're, like it says, this person is liberal, so we're charging them. What are they charging them with?
Yep. He was there with other people who just so happened to be protesting Trump's point of view.
And what are they charged with? Like you need a crime, you need something from the criminal code to charge them with, right?
Right.
So what are they charged with?
They're working on it. They're absolutely working on it, and this is huge.
But you said these people have been charged. What have they been charged with?
Well, no. They're being held.
Okay.
They're still in jail. A lot of them.
Under suspicion of what crime? Even to be held for a year and a half, you need to be told under suspicion of which crime. Which crime are they being held on suspicion of?
Well, yeah, conspiracy and all kinds of charges were put later. I mean, it's all
what charge? That's what I'm asking. Which charges are they being held on?
Well, as I think I've said already, charges of conspiracy, things like
conspiracy
that.
To do
all kinds of things. And, of course, you have vandalism. But each case is very nuanced. But, yeah, either way, G20
Okay,
had to
I'll look
bring some
into it.
attention to
I appreciate it. If people are being held... people are being held because they knew someone that had a political belief. That I want to know about. I will absolutely look into that. Thank you for the call. Appreciate it. 617-830-4750. Let's go to our next caller from the 202 area code. Caller from 202, tell us who you are, and you can jump right into your question.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay. I was wondering if the collusion situation, would that lead to a deeper situation such as money laundering and things of that nature?
I mean, the answer is basically yes. As Rudy Giuliani now has decided to point out at any opportunity, it's not even clear that collusion is a crime. So what we're talking about is a number of possible crimes that were committed, right? And this can include money laundering, campaign finance violations, obstruction of justice, witness tampering, so on and so forth. As many on the right will be quick to tell you, the collusion, it's in and of itself, is not a crime. But when we talk colloquially about colluding with a foreign power for the benefit of a domestic election, a particular candidate in a domestic election, there's a whole bunch of crimes that could be there. So it's not so much that like money laundering would be deeper than collusion. It might be one of the actual underlying crimes that is part of the broader collusion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
it's crazy,
that
right?
answers that. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no problem. All right, thank you. Very much appreciate the call. 617-830-4750. What's going on today, Pat? Something is just up today.
Yeah, I was worried that this live call segment was going off the rails.
Yeah.
I thank that last caller for vindicating it. I think we're back on track.
Let's try 774. 774 is sometimes local to Massachusetts. Go ahead, 774.
Oh, this is Ryan from Massachusetts.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, I was want to wonder about a policy instead calling for a ban on assault weapons. It would be different classes of guns.
Okay. Isn't an assault weapon a class of gun in a sense? I mean, it's a categorization, right?
Yeah. So I mean, so just like you have like certain classes for like 18-wheelers.
Right.
So it would require like more experience.
Okay, so how would you classify them?
Well, I mean, it would, kind of like automatics. They'd be able to shoot more rounds.
But isn't that already aren't these already? Pat, you're struggling over there. Isn't this how guns are already classified? Like you've got semi-auto and you've got automatic, you've got assault weapons, you have handgun. Like aren't these already the classifications?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm saying that they cause more damage than regular handguns, right?
As far as I know, they do. Yeah, automatics can cause more damage. Sure.
Yeah, so I'm saying in place of a ban, it would have separate classes of licensing. So,
oh, I see
like,
what
for
you're
example,
saying. So just because you get
yeah,
a permit that lets you have a handgun does not automatically allow you to have an automatic weapon, a semi-automatic weapon, whatever.
yeah. So I'm saying like kind of take away from the narrative, like for banning, like kind of banning guns, like
Right.
to just require more experience and training.
Right. I don't think
Yeah.
it's a bad idea. I think that there's something interesting to that. I think that you will very quickly come up against the pro-gun right will make the same arguments no matter how you want to slice and dice it. They'll still say it is an imposition and an unfair one at that. It is going against free and open gun ownership as per the, like, I think it's an interesting idea, and I think it's logical that the more damage that could be done in a short amount of time with a firearm, the more training that should be required. And I would argue insurance to have that gun. I totally agree with you. I just think you're going to have the exact same problems that we already have now passing just universal background checks.
Yeah, but I do think that will make it kind of like a tougher case to make, because then we can just say that, you know, we're just requiring more experience and training. So then,
yeah, I agree.
You know,
I don't disagree. Yeah. Interesting idea. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Appreciate the call. Always good to hear from folks in Massachusetts. 617-830-4750. Let's go to the 719 area code. Caller from 719. Go ahead.
Hey, David. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
So a few weeks ago, you were talking about why you're not a socialist, and you brought up the Pareto principle, and you said you thought that was like a compelling, argument against socialism. And I'm sort of wondering where you got that from.
So to be clear, what I said was that it's a phenomena that can be observed in many areas of human endeavors, and I would want a compelling case to be made as to why it shouldn't be a consideration in thinking about a socialist society.
Sure, but I don't really see where the sort of claims made by people who believe the Pareto principle is some sort of law of nature conflict with socialism.
Okay.
Because socialism doesn't say that people don't differ in their productive capacity. It just says that people shouldn't necessarily differ in, what they have as a result of it.
Right. The problem you would very quickly run up against, right, is that if indeed you were going to have that differentiation in everything but the outcome of what people end up with, you're going to be directly at odds with that distribution. Like, I don't know. I agree with what you're saying in principle. I just don't think it's an argument for why we should ignore that seemingly natural distribution in human endeavors when it comes to how to organize society and our economy.
Well, one problem is that the Pareto principle doesn't really indicate that people are actually that vastly different in productive capacity. They might, but this isn't really something that we learn from the Pareto principle. In the original sort of discussions of the Pareto principle and these few papers about it from the 70s and 80s, De Sola Price just shows mathematically the Pareto principle, Pareto-like distributions, right-skewed distributions arise in situations where there are sort of positive feedback loops. So in situations where there's uncontrolled positive feedback loop cycle. So money is something where when you have money, you get more money. When you have a lot of citations on a paper, you get more citations. Not because the paper is exponentially better, but because it has just drawn more attention and it's like a positive feedback loop.
You can find examples of
that we need
just because there are. I think I would tell you that just because there are examples where you can identify a positive feedback loop doesn't mean that one exists in all cases. So there are many of examples where I don't think that there's actually a positive feedback loop. So the fact that sometimes there's a positive feedback loop, I wouldn't even try to deny because it absolutely does exist. But I don't know what that tells us bigger picture.
It's just if all you're saying is that some people are more productive than other people, and we need to have a very robust incentive structure for them to be as productive as possible, that I would probably agree with. But I think that invoking the so-called Pareto principle or 80-20 rule here is kind of pseudoscientific. It doesn't really tell us anything that you couldn't just say by saying people are a little bit different.
I don't think I agree. I think that it tells us more than just saying people are a little bit different, but I would agree with you that it is not the be-all, end-all of figuring out how to arrange an economy, right? So I think that it's something that I mentioned in my piece, but it's not the foundation upon which my entire worldview is based. But I think that it would be wrong to say it's merely pseudoscience and it should be totally ignored.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. I think it's a bit of a pseudoscientific principle, but anyway, thank you for taking my call.
All right. I just don't think it's a pseudoscientific principle. I think we can find examples where it may not be exactly illustrative of the sort of underlying characteristic we're trying to assess. I don't know. I don't know if that conversation was remotely interesting to the audience, but I think that that's pretty interesting stuff. 617-830-4750. Let's try our caller from the 901 area code. Caller from 901, go ahead.
Hey, David. I wanted to ask about how you felt about James Gunn being fired over his tweets joking about pedophilia and racism and sexism. I want to hear your thoughts about it.
Sorry, who was fired for pedophilia?
James Gunn, the director of from Guardians of the Galaxy.
I had no idea. This is the first I've heard. I don't even know who that is, and this is the first I've heard of it.
Jokes about pedophilia, not pedophilia.
He made jokes about pedophilia.
Well,
what's Guardians of the Galaxy? I mean, I've heard of it. I have no idea what it is. That a movie? Is it a TV series?
I'm sorry. It feels like it's been like really like all over the social media.
I missed it. I apologize.
Of weeks. But it's pretty much a Marvel superhero movie.
Okay, that's why I wouldn't know about it.
Yeah, but James Gunn said jokes about pedophilia, very, very graphic and inappropriate jokes about pedophilia, and sexist and racism jokes about 9 years ago. And
90? Or 9?
No, about 9 years ago.
9 years ago. Okay. I was going to say, how old is this guy?
And well, he's I think he's like 50 now. But
okay.
And Disney hired him in 2012, but just recently, a couple weeks ago, Mike Cernovich, you're aware of him?
Oh yeah,
right.
Yes, I am.
So he went back in James Gunn's Twitter feed and brought up the jokes about pedophilia and racism and sexist jokes, and that ended up getting James Gunn fired from Disney. So,
right.
Do you think that Disney made the right choice? And I know this is you probably have to do more research at this.
Well, listen, no, I can answer it as based on the information you've presented. Here's the bottom line. Cernovich tried to do the same thing with Sam Cedar, finding a comment that was very obviously satirical about Roman Polanski from like 5 years ago, and it temporarily got him fired from MSNBC. Like, what was it, 6-9 months ago at this point? I don't even remember. And then MSNBC decided, hey, you know what? This was like clear satire. I don't know. I can't say whether Disney made the right choice for them. They need to make. They're obviously. Legally, they can do it. They can use whatever is not illegal. They can't fire him because of his religion. But if they think that this is not a relationship, a business relationship that's good for them, they can get rid of him. I question the value of what Cernovich is doing, quite frankly, because it just is a way to troll and to try to interfere without actually changing. Like, if I felt that Cernovich doing this was part of some broader effort to improve conditions for women on social media and in employment, then I might say, okay, I understand why he's going and doing this. It seems like just destructive trolling. For some people, it's costing them their jobs. For Sam, it didn't. But ultimately, Disney's got to make the decision that's right for them.
Yeah, again, I'm not a fan of Cernovich at all, and I do agree with you. I do agree with you about Sam Cedar, but what James Gunn said, I felt probably I don't think Disney probably should have hired him in the first place, but I felt that they were. I mean, I thought they were like 10 times the amount of what Roseanne said. I mean, even though I know that Roseanne said it right then and got fired, but
yeah,
I felt
this is
old
commentary. Yeah.
But even though they're old tweets, I felt that James Gunn probably should have. I felt that they were just not. I mean, if you look, I don't want to say them on here because I feel that they are a bit too graphic to really say.
I got you. Listen, I'll look them up. I can't, without knowing what the comments were, I can't really say. But that's my initial instinct, and I'll try to find out, what Guardians of the Galaxy is over the weekend if I have some time. I appreciate the call. I am out of time. I apologize for everybody I didn't get to, but we will take calls again.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
So we recently talked about Trump's Secretary of Education, Betsy DeVos, moving to not reimburse certain defrauded students who have been defrauded by the education industry or world. And that's sort of the topic of today's classic interview. We're going back to October of 2014 when I spoke to Mark Naison, who is an expert in corporate influence over education. And we also talked about standardized testing, which I know is important to others in the audience as well. So let's get to my interview with Mark from 2014. Think about it in the context of what we're seeing the Trump administration and Betsy DeVos push now in terms of education policy. I'm joined today by Mark Naison, who is a professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University, also co-founder of the Badass Teachers Association, the largest education activist group in the nation. The topic today is corporate influence on education. And Professor Naison, you know, I think if you were to say to many people, what is the effect of corporations on education? They might come up with something like, oh, is it the kind of corporatization of college? Or is it Doritos and Coca-Cola in vending machines in schools? But we're really talking about something far more sinister, aren't we?
Absolutely. The corporate influence is shaping what every child will learn from pre-K through college. And it's being done largely through influencing government bodies to impose curricula that teachers think are burdensome and inappropriate and sometimes abusive. And the best example of this is the Common Core standards, which are now being presented as if they were a bottom-up initiative by teachers, educated, and elected officials organized through the states, when in fact, $200 million of Bill Gates' money was given to governors' bodies, to PTAs, to teachers' unions, and foundations to try to push this initiative. And when we in New York State experienced for the first time tests aligned to Common Core, teachers, parents, and educators were just shocked that this had been imposed on them without any discussion and also without any ability to modify them.
Talk a little bit, if you can, about the impetus for, in other words, why do big corporations want to get involved in education? What is the ultimate goal?
Well, one of them is this is a huge market. It's, $788 billion market of government expenditure in education that test companies, technology and software companies all see as a tremendous market if you can standardize teaching enough so you can develop nationwide products for the market. So test companies stand to make huge profits if there is a national curriculum that is uniform across the country. So that's one motive and then people who are trying to develop a procedure to have the entire process digitized stand to make a lot of money from the software. But there's another motivation, and that is that a lot of businesses feel their labor force is not being properly trained by the public schools and want to make sure that there's kind of a uniform level of training so that if somebody graduates from high school, they can be employees who can plug right into their companies.
Do you see a connection, or do you see as two unrelated issues, what you and I have just been talking about for the last few minutes, and the issue of both the rewriting of textbooks with a kind of religious impetus or through a religious lens that we're seeing catalyzed quite a bit in Texas, as well as the fight to teach so-called controversies around, for example, evolution? Okay. Do you see those? Are these completely unrelated issues?
These are completely different initiatives. what's very interesting is that the people behind Common Core are very much opposed to those grassroots conservative initiatives. That's what makes this so complicated. Initially, the opposition to the sort of top-down curricular modification was coming a lot from conservatives. And it took a while for liberals and progressives to realize, wait a minute, when big money shapes education policy, that's a subversion of democracy. So there are many issues in education, and one of them is the attempt to try to undermine, teaching that is going on in science and history to present a more religious perspective. But then there is an attempt to reshape education policy from the top down in a way that really excludes teachers and parents. So we have a lot on our plate.
And talk to us a little bit about, once we see, or what do we know, I guess, is the best way to ask, about what the effects are on students who go through the education systems that are so influenced by corporation. What then is the effect when they later in life enter the workforce, for example?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I'm a labor historian, and I've done a lot of research in the 1930s when the largest corporation in the country was General Motors. Now the largest corporation in the country is Walmart, which starts off its associates at $7.50 an hour, even though its CEO makes $16,000 an hour. If you are looking at the kind of jobs we're creating, where 7 out of 10 jobs are going to be entry-level, moderate to low-wage jobs, it seems to me that what we're doing with a lot of these corporate policies, we're not encouraging critical thinking. We're encouraging rote learning. We're encouraging, obedience. We're you're taking out literature, for example, and putting in sort of, very narrow textual analysis. You're removing a lot of studies of history. You're removing hands-on science that is experimental for things which can be done on a computer.
It's amazing as you're saying this, and I don't know if this is my kind of cynical mind going to a dark place. What you're saying, in a way, and connecting it to Walmart as the biggest employer, is reminding me of when I read the great book Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, where there was a deliberate effort based on the knowledge that if everybody is very intellectually curious and fully equipped with critical thinking and other resources, there are many jobs that they simply would not do, they would not tolerate. Thus, there were people that were educated or raised in a particular way to tolerate those jobs.
David, you are right on target. I actually have a former student who's now a professor at LSU. Her next book is going to be on the Walmartization of education. What we have is an enforced standardization from the top down to reduce education to the lowest common denominator and take the creativity out of the classroom. And we're starting kids from pre-K. We're removing play. We're removing recess. All kids do is study for tests. And the tests are expensive. So what gets pushed out when budgets are strapped? Arts, music, science, school trips. It's almost like you're making kids adapt to a brave new world of low-paid work where they have little autonomy and authority.
In the last bit of time we have here, can you give our audience some ideas as to how they can work to counteract what we're seeing?
Okay, the best thing you can do is, if you think testing in your schools are excessive, have your kids refuse to take the tests. There is a growing movement of test refusal or opting out around the country.
And you're talking about the standardized tests, right? Not just tests within class.
Tests.
Yeah, okay.
I'm also saying, if your kids have recess canceled to study for tests, tell the school that's unacceptable. Tell the schools that there are too many tests. For example, in New York State, our third graders take 6 days of tests, 90 minutes a day. They take more tests than you take to get into law school or medical school. I think I go back to the 60s, and to me, the most horrible bipartisan initiative in my lifetime before this was the Vietnam War. And the part of the way we stopped it was to resist what we thought was an unjust war. Now, the most destructive bipartisan initiative is test-based education policy. And I think we have to resist the tests. Teachers, parents, students, I'll give you a number. Before No Child Left Behind, the average public school gave 6 tests a year. Now they give 17. This is way out of hand. And the only people can stop it are parents, teachers, and older students by basically saying, we won't take the test unless you cut back. And if you're going to spend money in our schools, spend money on things that make kids love school, which is art. And also stop scripting teachers and constantly judging them on the basis of test scores and coming in and observing them on rubrics where you check off little things. Trust your teachers to teach.
All right. We've been speaking with Professor Mark Naison, Professor of African American Studies and History at Fordham University. Really a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. It's a very important subject. And I think people don't realize what's going on until they talk to parents about what's going on with their kids in school.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let's get to some audience questions. First one, hey David, are there any countries in the world that you see as leading indicators of worldwide political shifts? Listen, it's the United States. If we have to pick a single country, a lot of what you see in the United States is indicative of changes that are happening in sort of like the Western democracies. But lately, other than the total atrocity that is the debasement of the culture and democracy as a result of Donald Trump being president of the United States, the right-wing nationalist rise in a number of European countries as a whole, it's not just what's happening in Poland, it's not just what's happening in Germany. The fact that in a lot of these countries, you're seeing in both Western and more Eastern European type countries, a rise in white nationalism and nationalistic, xenophobic, anti-immigrant type parties, that's a pretty significant shift to me. And I know that being in the United States, being part of the West, we're not as keyed in to changes that are happening in Southern African countries because we're ignorant to it. I think that's the right word. We just don't get as much news about that, and there may well be. But I think sort of in our world of the Western democracies, that right-wing shift in Europe combined with Donald Trump is very, very scary, and it signifies a broader worldwide trend.
Yeah, and even the United Kingdom choosing to pull out of the European Union exemplifies that as well. And you can see it beyond just Europe, right? It's Rodrigo Duterte in the Philippines.
Yep.
It's Erdogan in Turkey.
Right.
There's a lot of these rises going on in the world right now, and it's pretty terrifying.
I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but what we're seeing continuing in Venezuela, that we saw under Hugo Chavez, but now also under Nicolas Maduro, we'll probably lose 5 members because I even mentioned this, but that's also very problematic to me. And it's, Latin America is another thing. It's another animal altogether, and it's one that I pay much more attention to than, for example, what goes on in Africa or even Asia, because I'm from Argentina. But that's been a wave that's been ridden for now decades, involving the United States, pushing regime change in many cases, and so on and so forth. But it doesn't really represent a shift in the way that the white nationalist, extremist, identitarian types in Europe are scaring the hell out of me.
Yeah, and unfortunately, there's no real way to predict where it's going to, right? I mean, we think it's getting more right-wing and authoritarian around the world right now.
Yep.
Doesn't mean that in 10 years it'll be the same thing.
No, but 10 years is a long time to do some damage, right? 10 years is enough elections in a lot of those European countries in 2 years, in 3 years, 4, 5, 6, where by 10 years, imagine that there is just like a massive leftward swing in 10 years. You get, in a country like the United States, maybe a younger average population as baby boomers get older. I don't know exactly when it would be, but 10 years is a long time. And that's why we laugh when Trump signs some stupid executive order saying, we're going to do the opposite of what Obama did, whatever it is, and it's not really going to do anything. We laugh, or we say it's a waste of time, it's a waste of money. The climate change stuff, Supreme Court picks, damaging relationships with many of these European allies. 10 years will probably not be enough to undo it. Remember, Trump has like another 3 or 2.5 years. He might get 4 beyond that. We're probably going to need 10 years just to get back to where we were 18 months ago.
Yeah, some of those small island countries will be gone by then.
They won't even be there. Yeah, I mean, it's stunning. So I don't look at any one country, but I think in the last 5 years, that move in Europe has been very, very concerning to me. Hey, David, what about carbon taxes? How would you feel about using a carbon tax to combat climate change? Okay. I have kind of like opposing views on this. I hesitate to use taxes. You know that saying, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail?
Sure.
I don't like seeing everything as likely to be fixed with a tax. If I'm going to advocate for a tax, I want to be really sure about what impact it will have.
So you're generally opposed to like vice taxes, taxes on alcohol and marijuana and cigarettes, that type of thing?
I am, I wouldn't put them all under one umbrella, actually. So I think it's more nuanced than that. But like, let me give you an example. In a progressive taxation system, we know that a progressive tax at the very top on money earned by the very rich, which is most likely going to sit in a bank account instead of being spent on stuff or even offshored, right? We know that it's better for the economy because that's not money that would likely have a high multiplier effect, because the rich people who get a tax cut on everything they made above $2 million, it's not money that they need and it's not money they're as likely to spend. So we know that using that money to fund programs for people who actually need the money, that is economically stimulative. So that's when you use a tax, not as a chainsaw, but more, what's the analogy? As a scalpel, right?
Yeah.
What am I talking about? So in this same way, I actually have seen a number of good studies that say carbon taxes at the country and big corporate level are good ways to combat climate change. And it might sound crazy, right? Like, you pay to pollute. How does that work? That money actually can be used in ways that will offset, as the word suggests, that will offset the pollution that is created by the polluters, and it can get us a net lower amount of pollution and thus sort of help to mitigate or prevent the climate change problem from worsening as quickly, which is depressing that that's the way we have to think about it. So I am in favor of responsible and thoughtful carbon taxes to combat climate change when applied in ways that have been demonstrated to work. And this is a key, okay, before everybody says I'm a tax and spend liberal or whatever, because it's really not. Only as a bridge to a different future. The carbon taxes should be used in the short term to offset pollution, but in the long term to push companies and countries to get off of fossil fuels such that it's not even a tax that we're going to need in the future. That's my view, and it's very specific. It's not any tax I'm in favor of.
So you've talked about countries paying this tax or like big corporations. What about when you get to like small businesses, when you scale that down to smaller businesses, even to individuals?
Yeah.
Would that make any sense? I haven't seen anything on that.
You know, there are already, like when you buy an airline ticket, you pay like a fuel surcharge. That's for the cost of fuel. I don't know that I love the idea of passing this on to the individual consumer, because ultimately the individual consumer working as a group, individual consumers can lobby for change, right? They could say, we're going to boycott companies that aren't switching to renewable energy. But why is it their responsibility? I think that it's actually okay to say, we've identified this crisis that we have in our country, and we're going to put in place these carbon taxes to combat climate change in the short to medium term, with the medium to long-term goal being to get off of fossil fuels altogether. So here's where I want to hear from you. If you disagree with me that thoughtfully applied carbon taxes actually work, let me know. If you're just against it on principle, I don't really care to hear from you that much, quite frankly. I know I still will, but I really don't care to. If you want to make the case that there's no way to do the carbon taxes in a way that works, I want to hear from you, because that would be counter to the studies that I've read. Last question today. Hey, David, people in the United States are getting more and more non-religious. Fewer and fewer identify with any major religion. I'm wondering, as people let go of religious identity, is politics becoming the new religion? So how are we identifying a religion? I guess we're talking about a sort of dogmatic, reinforced set of beliefs.
Yeah, working backwards from your conclusion, right? Like you're part of a team.
Yeah.
Or like your beliefs are already set in stone and you try to find evidence that supports your theory.
I don't know that everybody would agree with that. I think a lot of people would say, no. I came to my conclusions because they're the right conclusions, not I've sought out evidence to support them because I've already determined my conclusions. But yeah, I think there is an element to that. I think that for some people, politics has already been a religion. And I don't know that that's necessarily changing. I think we just have less religion. And you don't always have to replace religion with something equivalent. As we've learned more about the natural world and our scientific knowledge has improved, people have started to walk away from religion. And you're seeing that in a number of different countries. Does that mean that science becomes a religion? No, I completely reject that idea. And in fact, science has an internal self-correcting error-correcting mechanism. That is fundamentally different than religion. So I reject totally the idea that science is a religion. Now, can anybody fall into circular, unfalsifiable, or at least unwilling to have falsified, dogmatic type beliefs about anything? Absolutely. But big picture, I don't think politics is really replacing religion. I don't think science is replacing religion. I think that science and a knowledge of the world is making religion increasingly obsolete, and people don't find the need for it altogether.
Right. It's more of that dogmatic thinking that we have to move beyond from. And when we talk about science, we talk about politics, we have to make sure that we're having those conversations in good faith, right?
Yes.
And that we're willing to take in new evidence and change our minds. Otherwise, it does become like religion in a sense.
The in good faith thing is an interesting one, because a lot of religious debate is not happening in good faith in the sense that people aren't really debating in a way that they're open to having their minds changed. When you do science or politics the right way, part of challenging your beliefs is really an inherent part of it. Some people don't do that. There are people whose religious beliefs or scientific beliefs fall under that umbrella that is like religion. But for the most part, it shouldn't be that way.
And you can't always just be trying to win, right? You actually have to seek out the truth.
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Unfortunately, the way it's practiced by many is not actually that way. But no, religion is not being replaced by politics, and religion is not being replaced by science. Our entire world is changing as we get more of an understanding of it. Okay, we have a fantastic bonus show for you today. We will also be, next week is just a normal week, right? This week had in-studio, out-of-studio, guest host, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah.
But next week, it's going to be just a normal, old-fashioned week of David Pakman Show episodes.
I think I'll make it in all 5 days. What about you?
Oh, boy. We'll talk about that after. Join us on the bonus show, www.joinpakman.com, patreon.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.